All right, let's talk about what's in the LR32 system. What you get in this system, in the Systainer itself, you get everything to do, line boring machine, your line boring holes, and also allows us to do the 35mm cup hinge for your European style hinges. What you get in here, you get 2 clamps, which you're going to need to clamp your rail down. We also get end stops. The end stops will actually fit into the rail itself. And what this does is it helps you line it up, the rail, in a correct position for your holes and your hinges. All right, so it goes like that. You get 2 of those, 1 for each end. What else you get in there is you get a centering mandrel. When you put the bits in, what you want into the router, you want that bit centered inside the hole on the base of the router. This will allow it to be centered. Okay, and what that does, else we get in here, we get these parallel stops. Helps keep the rail parallel to the front edge. They snap onto the rail itself. We tighten them down, and it makes it parallel. So what we get on the bottom side is we have a pin goes up against the edge of the piece of wood. All right, and makes them parallel. Now, the centering mandrel itself is going to go through this hole here. So when we put the router onto the base, that's what centers the bit inside the base itself. This base here, this part here will ride on the rail. So when we lock it in place, all right, and then we have this handle here that goes back and forth. Okay, and what we need to do, this pin, what most people think is that the drill bit goes through here to drill the holes, and it doesn't. This pin goes in the hole, and then the bit is outside the rail itself.
Oh, so it indexes it.
It indexes it. Perfect. Okay, so we get all that, and then on top of that, we also get our 3 bits. We get a 35mm cup hinge bit. We get a 5mm through bit. If you have a center of a cabinet, you want it holes on both sides, that goes through, prevents tear out. And then we have a mortising bit, which if you're in an end panel, you don't want to go all the way through. You want a flat bottom. That's what that's going to do. Now, what's nice about this base is it's meant to use with the 1010 router here. But what we can do, utilizing these 2 holes here and the screws that come in, we can attach it to the 1400. And in the 1400, you'll see these 2 threaded inserts here line up with these 2 holes, and it lines right up on the router. So when we put it in, we can use it with the 1010 or the 1400.
Okay.
All right, now what I want to show you is I want to show you how to calibrate our parallel stops to the base plate of the router. What you have to do, if you can't guarantee this is going to be calibrated, so what we have to do is we have to make sure that this is lined up to the base, which then is on the router. So the first thing we have to do is where it hooks onto the rail, there are 2 set screws here and here. We go in through these holes. It allows us to adjust them. So what we do is we set it on the rail and we pivot it back and forth.
Oh man, I can hear that.
All right, you hear it, it's off. We don't want any slop in there, because what we want to do is when we go down, we want it nice and tight so the holes are all lined up. All right, so what we're going to do is we have a little bit of slop in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a slotted screwdriver, set it in here, and I'm going to turn it a little bit. And what we want to do is we just want to see, we may have to do this a couple times. It should lock on there. There.
Oh yeah.
No play, and it still slides back and forth real easy.
Oh, that's cool.
All right, so there's no play in there. We're good to go. That's done. Now, once that's all set, what we want to do is now we need to calibrate these to the rail and the base plate. So what we need to do is we need to set, there's a scale on the blue part here. We need to take 0 and match it to 0 on the rod itself. So we're going to take 0 and 0, line it up, lock it in, and we're going to do that on both of them. Now the initial setup on this is only going to take you 5 or 10 minutes to get totally set up. Once it's done, you're all set. You should never have to change it again. So we're going to lock it onto the rail, anywhere on the rail, doesn't matter. And what we want to do is we have this pin on the bottom of the parallel stop, and we have this groove on the side of the base plate. That pin should slide into the groove. So we're going down in here, and if you can see it, the pin doesn't slide into the groove, it's actually offset. So now what we do is we take the 5mm wrench that comes with the kit, loosen up this bolt here, and what this will allow us to do is to slide this back and forth. And what we want to do is slide it in to where that pin slides into that hole. And what you're going to notice on this is you're going to notice that it's tight here against the plastic spacer, and up here there's about an 1/8 inch gap in between. Once you get that set, tighten up that nut, and then it should slide right in there. So now it slides right in. We know that that is zeroed out to the plate now. And you want to do that with both pieces. So now we're going to add a second one. Go right in there. And again, this one's off, only it's off to the back side now. So I think the other trainer has been messing with me. Emo! So what we're going to do is we're going to slide it back in there. Make sure it's touching here. Make sure there's a gap there. We lock that in, and it should slide right in there. And we're all set. So now both of the parallel stops are calibrated to the base plate itself. Now that we have that done, what we need to do, everything's calibrated. Now we need to center the router onto the base plates. So that's what we're going to do now. So what we do is we take the centering mandrel and we put it into the 8mm collet on the router itself. Now what you have to do, if you've got the 1010 and you've got this cover plate on a dust extraction, that needs to come off. So we pop this off, set that aside, and now what we're going to do is we're going to slide the centering mandrel into the collet itself. Now with the collet, we don't need to tighten it down, just hand tight is fine. And we're going to set it up on the base plate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the rail out of the way. Now what you have to look for is, I usually take this off also. Now you see this notch here in the base plate, and if you look on the base plate here on the plate for the line boring, that's all. So we're going to line that up. So we line it up just like that, and then we plunge it down to where the centering mandrel is in the center, and we tighten it down. Now I'll show you the centering mandrel on the bottom. You can see how it's centered inside the hole. Now I guarantee that the bit will be centered inside this base plate. Now what I recommend you do is really tighten these knobs down because you don't want any movement in there. Once you get that all set, release the base, and now we can take out the centering mandrel. Take the centering mandrel out. Now we're all set with that. That's done. And no matter what bit we put in here, it will be centered inside this hole because the centering mandrel automatically centered it. So, what we're going to do is set up the LR32, and in a true 32, everything is based off 32mm. So our sides of our 30-inch cabinet are 768mm. So what we do is we set up our end stops here at 16 up and out, and we put it up against the end of the board, and we put our other one in so it's tight up against the edge. When we snap it in place, it's the exact size. Then what we do when we want this, our hinge plate, the first hole for the hinge plate will be at 80mm. And then 80, and we do the next one. And then on the bottom, we do 3 holes up, 80mm, and then the next one. So that's your hinge plate. Then what we did is the center of the board here, I don't know if you can see the line or not, and we do 3 up above and 3 down below. And that will give us our adjustment for our shelves. Then what we want to do is we want to take our parallel stops and set up 0 on the blue part and 37 on here on both of the parallel stops, and we lock it into the end of the rail. And what we're going to do is we're going to slide it in. And we're going to slide it in until these pins touch the front of the shelf, or the side of the cabinet, I mean. Once those are all set, then we clamp it on. All right, once we get that all set, then we take these off. We no longer need these. We have our OF1010 already preset to a 10 millimeter depth. And what we do is we look inside the hole here on the router itself, and we can see our arrow marks where we plunge the holes. There, as you can see, we've got our two hinge plates at 80 millimeter up, and then the line boring up front, up in the middle, and then 80 millimeter here. Now that we've drilled out our line boring holes for our shelf pins, and we also drilled out for the hinge plates for the hinges, okay, now we need to drill out the side for the door. So what we're going to do is I'm going to disconnect the clamps here, so we take the clamps off. And I highly recommend clamping the rail down to your board so it doesn't move. If you look on the end stops we talked about, we have 16 on one side. We flip it over, and we actually have 32 on the other side. Now when we do this, we always want the number up and out. So I still have 32 up and out. Now we lock it back in, okay? And I want to show you the difference between the two. So what we'll do is we look at one side, and I have it up 32 up and out on this side. And on the other side, I've got 16 up and out. Now when we flip it over, you'll see 32 ends up right dead center in the center of the hole. If you look at 16, it actually ends up dead center in between the two holes. So by drilling the first hinge plates, we did it on 16. Now we have to go 32 because we want to end up with that hole in the center of those. So when we're doing the cup hinges for the doors, we want to be in the center. So it'll automatically offset it. So we're going to set this up 32 up and out again. We're going to move in, lock it down. Okay, so now our rail's all set, so we can set that aside. Next thing we want to do is we have to change the bit from either the through bit or the stop bit to the 35 millimeter cup hinge. Now, what I highly recommend you do is always bring the bit down in between, because it's real close to that. If your base moved at all, you will cut into this. You ruin your bit and your base plate. So I recommend always take a second, drop it down in there so you can see the difference between them. Make sure it's still centered in there. Now the other thing we want to do is we need to get our door up in here. So what we're going to do is bring our door that we've done, okay, and flip it over. Now we're going to put the cup hinges. Already got them done, but I want to show you the setup. That's the main reason for this. So we'll get the clamp down in here. Okay, we're going to put our rail back up in there, and what we're going to do is we're going to look at, and if we measure back from here to the center, remember the 3 holes that we talked about for the hinge plates. So from the end, it's 1, 2, 3 holes. All right, so on the 3rd hole, what I do is I mark it with a circle. And then on the other side, when I bring it down here, again, 3 holes. This one split, So we want 1, 2, 3 solid holes. All right, and the reason why I mark it there is I can still see it through here, so I know exactly which line to drill. So now what we need to do is we need to figure out what the setback is for the rail itself. Now typically what it is it's a 5mm gap from here to here. So from the end of your door to the edge of the hole, it's going to be 5mm. So we take the 5mm and half the distance of the hole, so we have 35, which will be 17.5, plus that, 22.5. What we would do is set it to 23. Because we have a 0.5mm of adjustment in our clamp. So what we do is we take 0 on the blue part, set it to 23, and we lock it in. Do that on both sides. We want it parallel. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring this down here. We're going to set this right here. Like that. And again, I want to make sure that my pin on both sides are up against the board, and I also want to make sure that my end stop is up against the edge of the door. Once it's up against the edge of the door, we're going to clamp it in. We'll slide it in, clamp it in, and we're going to do that on the other side. Now we're all set. Take those off. Now we need to set the depth of the bit itself. And what we want to do is we need to micro adjust it. So to micro adjust it, we take the bit down to where it touches. So it's at 0, lock in the handle. Now we drop this down. We want to 0 everything out. So we drop this down to the pin or the turret. And I usually go the lowest one so I have the most adjustment. I also will take this, drop that down to 0, and also take my micro adjust to 0. So now everything's zeroed out. For your standard European style hinges, the majority of them are going to be 12mm. I always go 13 just to make sure it stays nice and flush and give it a little bit of extra room. So I will bring this up to 13, lock it in. So my pointer, which is up here in the center, not the bottom, but the center of this, is at 13, which gives me a 13mm gap between the turret and the end of the stop.